But I don't have a full hour anyway, so, and I wrote a chunk of this last night, so if there's any misspellings, please be kind. That's my desk. I'm a founding member of the Open Source Hardware Association. If anybody wants to join, making things that are free. Good. The question is, to make sure. So, I guess first, Software Concepts International, and after the next slide, got a little more commercial. You've probably heard this in other presentations because you've been to other people, but we are a OpenVMS managed services, but we also manage hardware as well. So we have a couple of customers that we take care of their storage arrays, Virtual Connect, C7000s, and all of that kind of stuff for they just lost the institutional knowledge. And since it's running VMS, so somebody was quoted in one of my earlier sessions as saying this. Storage arrays aren't in use anymore, and that's about 50 petabytes sitting there. So I'm pretty sure storage arrays are still used in data centers. I can't say who that is, but he might know. Having logged into these. And this is quite a few years ago. This is all filled up with even more. So I think they're up to 150 petabytes in this one data center. We're here in Nashua, local, international reputation. So if you need anybody to help you, augment. We do database stuff, RDB, Codicil, emulator. We're a carrying reseller. Migration. So we're going to go through kind of an overview. So I'm not going into QIOs and memory transfers and bits and bytes. This is more of capabilities assessment for VMS. What's new from the last time we did a boot camp in 2017 and tying into some of the new platform paradigms like x86, but even existing stuff. So look at what arrays are available, new HP and non-HP. And this is really a major bullet point. In previous incarnations of life, HP would not talk to you about how to make your EMC work because they didn't care. They didn't do the certifications really. So they said, well, go back to EMC or go back to Pure, go back to them. VSI has no ownership of a storage company. So they're happy to work with something that will drive VMS sales. And I have a good example of that actually happening. Storage options, available, virtualized, emulated, and some business continuity. File sharing, touch a little bit on this. This is near and dear to my heart. I work with Paul Nunez to try and keep that up to date. And Brett, if he's still here, beating him up to make sure that we're up to date. And NFS, obviously. Me, I'm an HP accredited systems engineer, which doesn't really mean much, but I do know 3PAR pretty well. And back when they had it, I was also an accredited systems engineer for OpenVMS. They don't offer that anymore, but since they don't offer it, they can never take it away from me, right? I think. Red Hat certified systems admin. I never bothered to get the engineer, but we use it a lot in the emulator. I was a data center manager for a long time with a healthcare company. And they currently still have about 50 VMS nodes. It's just a big, that healthcare company, medical testing, every single medical test they do runs through VMS. And they do, I don't know, about 500,000 a day. No, probably more than that. 750,000 tests a day. And I'm probably one of the younger ones, only 20 years as a VMS person. So initially I was a networking person. And now I'm on my 9th year of Software Concepts International. I used to work with that gentleman over there. So first and foremost, we are now supporting newer adapters in the titanium. So this is all bare metal. As you heard, if you were in the previous presentation, I'll get to that later. Also supporting the newer HBAs in a virtualized environment as well. But in a titanium, we can do 16 gigs VSI, has the recipe to make this happen, and we'll look at that a little bit. And you'll also notice, and I left this in because in the i4, i6s, you can get converged adapters, which will do Ethernet and SAN iSCSI as well. Don't support iSCSI yet, but someday soon. In fact, since we don't support iSCSI, we have to turn this up. Really quick view. Everybody used EFI integrity. Is there anybody that hasn't? All right, so it's just a quick run through so that we're on a common frame of reference when we get into the UEFI or x86 and such. But a new interface. It was back in the day. Right, shell. You get an interface to the hardware and a bunch of applications. And if you haven't really done much with this, I encourage you to go revisit some of the stuff that's included in the FAT partition container file that BSI provides with a whole bunch of fun tools inside of that EFI. So it does a lot more than just boot. And the partitions came from seeing FSN devices indicated that the device has an EFI partition. So you can have a bunch of drives that have EFI partitions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to boot, but they have the same tool set. You can actually open up that partition inside of VMS. You can mount that container file, stuff files in it, and have it available at the EFI level. Handy thing if you need to do firmware updates on servers. There's other utilities on the newer servers, i4s, i6s. There are Windows tools that will push those firmwares out, but those don't make it easy to update some of the older interfaces, the older HBAs, the older Ethernet adapters, the old smart array adapters. That new way of doing the firmware update, unfortunately, doesn't include everything. This ability to actually boot off of a firmware update does have all that stuff. Shows up as a black device if it doesn't have a partition. So normally, obviously, as we know, probably the bootable device has a mix of the FAT partitions and black partitions because we have the stuff that we can see as a FAT partition, and then we have the actual stuff where VMS data lives. So the actual firmware, the partition. So this is created by the operating system. So this doesn't come, the same thing for the UEFI, comes from somebody in this building or next to here that made it happen. Value-added software utilities. We'll look at a few of them. The boot manager. Some of this is lifted from an old presentation, but I want to make sure everybody at least had the same reference point. If there's any questions, I tend to talk too quick. Please just interrupt. So a number of ways to boot, right? Set up a boot using the boot options maintenance menu. This is the most preferred and easiest way within VMS. You can diddle with the boot options, the order, the timeouts, which devices, if you want to add the different sets for flags or a conversational or a diagnostics boot, all of those are possible within that boot options. There's an EFI program to make those happen as well, but just a lot of weird syntax and you're likely to make as much of a mistake as anything. One of the advantages of doing the EFI set, boot config utilities, is you can set the dump device before you boot. Using boot options, you're obviously already booted, and if you change your dump device, it means nothing to anyone, right? Until you reboot again. So that dump device is only read out of the EFI at the time you boot. So if you're going to do dump off this system disk or change your boot to dump disk, obviously if you're dumping to the system disk, you don't have to have anything in there. It will try that first. But if you're dumping to a different disk, it only reads that at boot time. So you need to reboot if you're going to change that or set it up for the first time. So using the EFI utilities, save yourself a reboot. When booting from the DVD, you may need to execute the following map-r. So This is a map dash reconnect. Oftentimes, this doesn't even work. You have to type in a reset. If you presented a new one, for example, from the storage array, you may not see what you presented until you actually do a reset. It does a full scan of the hardware bus. The map dash reconnect approximates that, and sometimes you get left. And this is where some of the utilities will show up in the EFI. This is just one of this, the EFI VMS directory, lots of good tools. So for example, this VMS show, before you go in to VMS, you can see the enumeration of the devices at the EFI shell before you even boot VMS to make sure that the devices you expect to be there when you get lit up are there. And you even get things like the MAC address, size of the drives, and what VMS will call them when it starts up. So if you want to find out what interfaces Ethernet interface before you even boot, so I've got one onboard interface, that's a motherboard NIC. This is a PCI, right?
Right. Just typo there. It's actually VMS underscore show space device. First command there under show.
100%, good. See, somebody's paying attention. 100%. VMS underscore show space device. You just do show, you get a bunch of stuff, but yes. How did that work? How did we do a screen capture like that? I'll show you how we did that, because you can create what they call aliases. So inside of EFI, you can create shortcuts to your server, right? You can create shortcuts for things you do a lot of, and it will store it in there. So if you don't want to have to keep remembering what to do, you can create an alias. I don't know if that's in here. It might be. These are some of the commands that are inside there. This IPV, the Titanium primary boot executable, I believe, is the thing that it transfers to after the EFI lets go to start VMS. So this is a compiled image, obviously. The tools, the update, this is where you can put stuff. By default, there's nothing in there. The tools are a bunch of other tools. You can even start this up as an FTP server. So if you want to put stuff in this drive without mounting the container inside of VMS, you can actually start this up as an FTP server, assign it an address, and you can actually log into it and transfer files. Pretty esoteric stuff you have to deal with. You can. So that's what a boot, again, we've all seen this, the default. So this is important to change these order. When you're first building up a system, we always put the shell first, put the maximum timeouts, 65535, so it won't go anywhere. If somebody does hit return accidentally, you'll just end up in the shell instead of moving something you didn't mean to boot. So best practice, until you're ready for that to go into production, leave it at the EFI shell first. What else putting in here? But here you can see what it enumerated. So different SCSI buses and bloods, and you'll see we have the same 110000. That's because we have 3 different partitions. Okay. If you 1, 2, 3, you can see that's a VMS disk. You will also get on the fiber, which I don't see here yet, a different FS drive for each path. Right. So we have the same virtual volume presented from 4 different ways because it's going through a switch from the storage to the array to the Titanium. You might end up with 4, 8, 16 paths. It will show up with that same drive multiple times representing each of those pathways. And you can boot from any one of them. Always a good idea to try every one of them, see if it actually boots. GUI partition. This is stuff hopefully everybody knows, but there's not. It's not me. ODS 2 doesn't support FAT, obviously. Both formats exist, so that's the 2 different partitions, the FAT and then the ODS partition. Obviously now with the SI VMS, you can only boot from ODS 5 volume. So GPT is seen as GPT-sys, which is also in mass file directory. So if you look at a root of the boot disk, you'll see that GPT. Delete that file, and it will not boot. So if you want to screw with somebody, VMS doesn't care if it's there. But when you go to boot, it won't be happening. Easy to make that happen again. So we had the VMS boot command, right? So Itanium has that as well to recreate that file and put it in the right place. It's updated with VMS update. So this is kind of an important thing if you do update. So when you do the updated VMS, it'll ask you, do you want to create boot entries in the EFI menu? If you hit no, you need to remember to go do that yourself later, right? Before you try and boot again, or it won't boot. Right? You manually go in.
Why would you?
Because it makes some really ugly entries. It doesn't give you a nice way to name them. So what we often do is we'll make a set of boot options, and then we'll make another set of boot options with comma 1 to do a conversational boot. And it gives you the option of naming it like node name DJ123 space conversational. And that's what shows up in the menu. When the install routine does it, it just gives you the device name. You don't even know what node it belongs to. So that I actually always hit no. But hey, remember, before you do that reboot, to go in and create your own. But if you hit yes, it will do the right thing. And it puts them first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is. And maintenance partition is partition 3. So this is that variables you were talking about, right? So you can set these up, and you can set up aliases. Just little hacks, but it's like if you're living in here, this makes sense. But so you were right, and I was right. Some of these are handy, like if you don't remember all your DOS commands, this lets you alias them out and make them whatever you want. But a handy one. So all of the boot settings, what it knows about the disks, the boot options, the dump, all of that stuff stored in the non-volatile RAM that's part of the server. We have a lot of customers with Blade servers, Virtual Connect, and it's great because you can just take and automatically assign the profile, what WWNs it has, what MAC addresses, serial numbers, everything to a different blade. But the NV, the actual EFI knows nothing about any of this. So you can back up your NVRAM and then restore it onto a new blade. So you don't have to go through the whole process of recreating that boot again. And then at 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes this is easier than remembering which LUN you booted off of. So they give you an option. There's an NVRAM backup. We're not going to go through that. It's just too complicated. But look it up. Okay, just Google out NV RAM back, Itanium. Right. The other alternative, it's certainly not a bad idea. Anytime you're playing around with those menus, take a screenshot, store it, right? Easy enough. Then you have the actual ones that you booted off of, and all the other configuration is in there as well. And we're just sending out these presentations. So this is the very ugly link for getting that NVRAM backup, the instructions, and the actual files themselves. Pretty simple. Just run that out, mix a copy, give it a name, off it goes. And then all the system information, system ID, ROMs, all that stuff, all the information about it. It's not copying the RAM, just the information about what it was. And then they have a restore option that does the reverse. Easy peasy.
So is that applicable across the entire Itanium product line?
Yep, all the way back to 2600s or whatever they were.
26 backward.
Yeah, we have a 2600 we got as part of the porting workshop. That's one of our nodes that we still use. And yes, this all works there. Superdomes, 8640s, any of the big ones, little ones, all the same. I'm sorry? Used it on one. But, and I can't, honestly, I don't know if I've ever used it on the i4s or i6s, so, that your mileage may vary. Driver's list. So this kind of gets into the way that you had to configure the storage. So now we're actually getting back into storage. So this enumerates the various configuration entry points for the EFI drivers that are presented to the machine. So we can see we've got 2 driver channel old ones. You'll also potentially see the smart array in there. So to get into the ROM for configuring that utility, you have to go in the setup utility for that driver. So drive config, setup, and the entry point numbers for that. So 23, I should have done a driver's list. It would have said 26 next to it. And this is the only way to go in and deal with the actual boot configuration parameters for the card. i6s and the new cards, you can do that through the BIOS, and we'll look at that real quickly as well. So some basic settings, stuff we may not use, loop ID, because we don't do loop connections, connection option, loop preferred, otherwise point to point. If you can't find a loop, this is not how it should be set. It should be set point to point, forget everything else. So that's all we support, is point to point. Why bother interrogating the sand to see if there's a loop out there we can connect to point to point? So you cannot connect an Itanium to an array, right? You have to connect an Itanium to a switch to an array, right? So that is the right setting. This is run. Interrupt for every IO completion. The other one is polling, where it will just wait and then go get IOs. Don't know if we support that, but it'd be awful. So, but there is some delay you can put. If you're really getting hammered, you can actually change the delay. It does that interrupts. But why would you want to, right? We want to go as fast as we can. Most of the defaults you'll rarely ever change, except for this one, which is the scan level, right? This tells it what we're going to look for at the time we initially scan. So 0 is we scan the devices listed in the adapter's NVRAM. What's in that boot options menu, that's what it's going to find, and only what it's going to find. 1, we scan all the discovered devices, and 2, scan devices listed in the boot order list. So basically that one or that one. After you set things up, right, you put it in 1, do a reset, it'll find everybody, takes a while, set up your boot options, come back in and put it back to 0 so that it boots quickly. If you don't do that, it'll still work just fine. It'll just take forever, especially if you've got a big array with a lot of ones. It'll take a long time every time you come up. No fun. Right. And this, again, we should be able to see this, is that show device again. So DGA2, and the all important 1 number. Have this, which means up in the storage guys, but that is the piece you should try and remember. This is what shows up in that menu as well.
Can you get to this from ECL, from VMS, or is this only at the shell level? So if you're up and running, could you get back and change this?
Absolutely. So boot underscore options and sysmanager is a GUI, and I don't know if I have it in here, to build up the menu. And when you add in a new device, it will show all this information.
But can I get back to change the this policy setting?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. In either new or old world. Yeah, that is only available at boot time because you have to get an EFI shell, or corollary for the new ones is the device manager GUI. Good segue. So this is the device manager GUI, right? For the new ones. I am putting this document in what's getting distributed, but easily accessible on the web. If you just type in DSI 16 gig SAN, you'll end up here. And they did a very good job of documenting the steps needed to enable the 16 gig adapters. And you have to do this. It will not work out of the box. right? So adapter settings is the first one to look at. This is accessible just simply by going in, booting the Itanium, and one of the options is device manager. I didn't show that first screen. And it will show you the devices. You pick the HBA. I think this is the last one they made. And yes, I encourage you to be on that version or newer. I don't think there is a newer, so you just got to make sure you're on 8.05.43. If you're not, upgrade first. Nice here that you can get the WW port numbers because your SAN guys are going to want that right first. So instead of going to VMS and finding out what your port number is there, out of this adapter information screen, and in that command line, there's an adapter information that gives you this number, right? Typically 2-port card, so C2, C3, the other card would be C4, C5, C0, C1. But they need the port number, not the WWNN. Node number means nothing to them, but they can figure it out anyways. And these are all the defaults. The defaults are okay. All right. You don't normally have to do that. There's an actual enable button that you have to sometimes flip. I tend to not do auto, especially if you're using older infrastructure. Instead of letting it try to figure out the speed, make it the speed that you know it is on the switch. If you're going to change anything, then you just change it on the switch to match what you're putting in here. But kind of like not working. To me, it just tends to work better by making both sides equal. All of these are the defaults. That one, shared memory features should be enabled. That's disabled by default. The documentation, again, has this very well laid out. And then this is that corollary of the command line one, scan line. When you change this on a port, it changes it on all of the ports. So you don't need to go into every port and change it. It's changing it at the card. And you can even see that if you went into the other port, you'll see that it changed. I normally go in here and turn off the Pixie boot from the Ethernet. I know this isn't storage, but it's important on the newer servers, right? You get what they call a converged interface, right? So it could do storage, could do Ethernet, could do both. And we don't like that. We'll get errors on your boot. So we want to do force, right? Single mode, right? So the MF allowed, I'm not even sure what the GPIO is, but the default is MF allowed. So it can be a multifunction adapter to do iSCSI, for example. So the forced makes it an Ethernet only adapter. We'll not try and do storage yet. This is a good thing in the device manager, right? It comes up, there's a button that says health check, and it'll make sure everything is happy and tell you that it's happy before you carry on. While the drivers are happy, life is good. So very different animal in x86, right? Documentation link is up there that I liked it so much. This is scary. I printed it out because I'm old. Having pictures that I can see without being in a 90-page PDF, very handy. But they did a great job on this. They did a great job in the installation instructions for the various virtualization platforms. If you were in the storage one previous to this, you saw some of the wranglings they have to go through to get things going. But different animal, very well documented. As soon as you're familiar with VM config, the install. So if you're not, get your VMware, whatever it is, AVM, VirtualBox, VMware, that person who knows that, get them involved. Right. Legacy BIOS is not supported when you build up a new VM. Oftentimes you want UEFI or old BIOS. We can't do old BIOS for the x86. Secure boot right now is also not supported. It's kind of a Microsoft thing, as I understand it. But learning here, as we all are, it looks like VSI is going to try and support it. Doesn't exist yet, so you have to make sure you've unselected it. You can do the VMS install initially from an ISO presented as a virtual disk or an actual physical disk that you've passed through into the VM. Pretty uncommon, but it works. USB stick even will work. So you can stick a USB in the back of the machine, VMware, KVM, whatever, pass it through. Why bother? Let's get your file, stick it somewhere. Right. Also, now I have not done this. Has anybody done this? You can actually build up, or if you have a web server, just stick that in a directory. And you can run the VMS kit boot utility out of the EFI shell in the x86 world, and it will read in the ISO installation file from the web server. I imagine the initial reading is pretty slow, but once you've got it, should be pretty quick. It's not like the old info server network boots. Some VMware requires installation additional packages. Oracle's VirtualBox provides a shell. And KVM has a QEMU. All of those packages need to be installed to get you the UEFI shell so that you can read in VSI's boot manager. This is not the UEFI. The extensible firmware universal is provided by the operating system, the host operating system, not the guest. Boot flags, very different. So there's a whole different, well documented in there, of the different boot flags for doing different diagnostics and different output. The root, flag 0,1 still works, but all the other fancy boot options flags are different. Independent from VSI, operating system, any version of boot manager should load any instance. I have not had where it didn't work, but on the installed disks, the 922, 923, 92, whatever, that comes with the boot manager. So why not use the most recent one? That's the link for this. All the files comprised core VSI OpenVMS kernel are prepackaged into a logical disk. Whole different animal. If you don't have all the infrastructure to play around with x86, it's simple to do. Right? You can get a free version of Linux. You can get a free version of VirtualBox. You can get a free version of VSI x86, a community license or an evaluation license. So all those things free. I have one running on my MacBook Pro with VMware Fusion, just like $100 or something, $130. And you can create an x86 guest in VMware Fusion. Lucky in the fact that I have the VMS licensing, but you can get those as a community. And we don't have time to go through all of this, but there's a lot of magic going in here, right? But one of the main ones to keep in mind is this dump current. It's actually a whole nother installation of VMS sitting on that memory disk. At the point the system crashes, it actually boots into that and starts the process of doing the dump. There's a set dump device that you can put the dump to a different disk, but the dump is actually executing out of this disk. This is why we have no ability to do a common system disk in a cluster of x86 machines. They're working on this. I don't know what the magic's going to be, but they're working on it because they know that's a problem. Right? And this is all the magic. Again, we're pushing this out a little bit, but we be distributing these. But there's the actual container file, right? When you end up booting, you end up with that memory disk, right, which has all of this information in it. Don't dismount, disconnect, or remove the memory disk. Just let it sit there and be happy. I'll get a new device that you don't know what to do with. I think this might be a copy of the other one. Again, if you haven't seen this, right, just going to rip through these, but if you get into the boot manager, which you can do for no money, you don't need a VMS license to light this up. This is how, right? So that's how the boot commands, right? The message related commands. So this just enables messaging as you're booting. Okay. More of those and a bunch of checks. And some of these checks are nice. In fact, I lifted the screen off of somebody else's presentation when I was here. Dev check I forgot to include. So we'll probably see an ugly screenshot of that at some point. This is more help with the install. Enable kick legacy serial port. I was going to ask what that one is because I don't know. Anybody ever use it? No clue what it is. Headless page 1 reset. Draw. And then this is the new flagging, right? You'll notice, right? That the one consistent. So that the most common one that you would use is still very much valid, but the diagnostics and how it interoperates with the OPA0 and configuration messages, all of these are different than what exists in the actual EFI that we use today on Actane. But you can get all of those just by typing in flags. And just do a devices command and it will give you the devices. Here's our DKA. So this is a fiber channel. This is a local disk, a container file that is presented as a disk. Right. Environment dump. So this kind of gives you the last time it booted. The boot flags are set. So this is equivalent to like a show boot star kind of a thing, right? Terminal, setting up your terminal. So, and it even gives you, it's a nice thing, it kind of gives you the instructions on how to set up that serial terminal. There was discussion about that being buried in the different documentation. Well, it says it right here, how to do it, right? So, keeping in mind that this will work for VMware Fusion for $110, but it won't work for the VMware Standard, which is $10,000. So to get this on a bigger VM where ESX hosts, you have to have the enterprise version. There's ways around that. And 9.2.3 console will have a way to get to the console without having to have the big expensive licensing. And then these are all the various protocols that you can actually connect to that serial console. Most everybody's doing Telnet, not even encrypted. And then you have to go find a Telnet client. This is the one I lifted. It says dev check, which is nice. It gives you an enumeration of all the hardware that it sees. And for a particular device, it's a PCI standard drive, its number, and then FS1 and the block that's on there. And the label for the UAFI. I've got to XG. That's handy. Dev check. If you got a lot of devices, it'll dump out all of these screens. If there's too much information, any key to continue or Control C, which is not documented, will break out of it. You'll be hitting return and any other key will just keep going. Okay. So that's some of the meat and potatoes behind the scenes. This is probably an ugly slide coming up, but I published this as well as the presentation. But some highlights, the newest HPE replacement for 3-part is supported only on 8.2.3. 8.2.3, what is that? 8.2.L3, 8.4.2.L3, one of those. L3. Primera, the 2300 fiber channel, pure flash array. So this is an example of something that is not VSI because they don't make storage. It's not HP. It's a competitor to HP storage. VSI certified it to work on VSI. So we had a customer, we were instrumental in that wanted to go into Pure. He engaged us to figure out this could work or not. We said we'd help you do a proof of concept, but we want to get PSI's blessing first before we even try. And they said, well, not only that, we'll help you certify it if you can get us some gear or get us access to the gear. We'll actually help you run the tests because we want to add that on our list as well. And they did. EMC Unity, again, most recent common stuff. So this is the eye chart, but this, for better or worse, this is VSI, so they don't go before 1H1. Obviously, EVA 4000, we're pretty sure that works on previous VMS versions of 841H1, right? I think probably VMS 55-2 work. But VSI is not stating it will, right? Because they're only going to bless their versions. So this is all the hardware platforms from 8640 down to the 860 blades. Doesn't speak to x86 at all. And then the arrays, so you can see Pures in here. And HP, the new HP is in there as well. So this is the latest offering from HP. Minimum of 842L3. Will it work with 201? I'm free to keep, but I think 201 is 2L3. 2L3 is just qualified patch level. So, but if you're going to call VSI and ask them for support, right?
2L3.
The drivers themselves, which was part of a patch kit, right? So that what they're saying with 2L3 is that we know you've done at least this number of patches because it's all embedded in the 2L3 distribution. So that's why they want to see everybody on 2L3 because it makes the support easier. So if you're going to try and run it on i6, we know you already have the right drivers. No thin provisioning, and I just learned this here. I'm learning like everybody else, right? So this is somewhat qualified. On the x86, they don't provide support for thin provisioning, but really what they mean by that is they don't have the utilities to do the unmap to take back the storage that you've relinquished. You have a terabyte volume and now you've got rid of the big giant database and you only have 100K on there. Can I give the storage back, the remaining storage? The reclaim option, which VMS used to have, is not supported and provided all sorts of problems. So that's really what they mean by no thin provisioning. We actually have a customer that's running this. They have no choice on alert. Thin provisioning is the only choice, right? So they provided thin. When we did the shadowing, it filled it up anyways. All the blocks are filled. But not to worry on x86 using this new storage array, because really all they're talking about is reclaim and unmap, and you just need to tell your storage guy, sorry, whatever we take, we get to keep. Never get back. It's okay. If you use FreePAR or Primera, there's a whole separate management console you have to have, and a virtual service processor they have to have, and all sorts of mess there. That's all embedded in this now. So that's nice. That was a mess. Weird thing, you have to have.
Site.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is that not the MSA?
Yes. Yep. And I haven't done this myself, but talking to the customer that did, you had to have GreenLake initially to do the initialness of set. Once it's set up, you're good. But the actual commissioning of it, the bringing it up from ground zero, HP should be doing that for you anyways. And they have a cloud version of GreenLake that lets them attach to your brand new shiny equipment and get it going. But yeah, I guess it's a way to force that sale. CLI is almost identical to FreePAR and the commands and stuff. So Primera was a step into that. This is bigger, faster, quicker, better replication. This is the smaller version of that. And also came out way before that. 2300. Updates to FreePAR Primera will prevent SSH from. So we ran into this. So we have a customer, we helped them do the 3PAR update, and we had scripted out some of the manipulations of the 3PAR from VMS to do things like snapshots and present those snapshots to a different system so they could have some play volumes on their dev system. It died because the algorithms were not supported from the VMS SSH. So all we did was take a directory tree of OpenSSH, stick it somewhere, made a symbol pointing to the new OpenSSH so we could use that. Customer did not want to actually upgrade to OpenSSH because that's a little more involved. So that was a good workaround. And fairly supported, but we're using it in a very limited fashion. Users aren't using it. We are, but that is a little gotcha. PHP, pure. And I got this from our customer that's actually using this. That we used to work there. So that goes, their compatibility goes back to this. They know it because they're running it. But again, VSI statement only speaks to 841H1 going forward. This particular customer has only got a few of those installations. The vast majority are 8.4 HP. So you can't boot or dump from Alpha. And replication does not support active synchronization. So it's an async replication scheme that you have your data on the other side, but it's not synchronous. So this is kind of what 3PAR does if you're in an extended distance situation. Anyways, it supports VMware. I'm not going to talk about any of this. Actually, if you didn't attend the session for the people that know this, I would make sure that you get it after they upload it. Jacoby and gang. So the whole direct IO. But most notably, the direct path A is only available in 923. It doesn't support booting, doesn't support vMotion. So some definite, and one particular card. So there's some definite limitations, but for playing around, why not? So again, this just speaks to the thin provisioning that I talked to. They have no plans to support it. Do not enable thin provisioning, even if the hypervisor supports it. So this is the sentence they need to fix. This is right out of the documentation. I've asked them to fix that. It makes it sound like if you do it, you're going to die. And this works just fine. What won't work is giving the storage back. And these change every day, right? VirtualBox. So we are actually running VirtualBox under Linux, under VMware. Right? So every time we touch something, it's a whole science experiment. But we can. We're not going to run anything to perform on it, but that's okay. Future support for bare metal, which is interesting. I have not heard spoke of in this whole conference. I know they're doing it. They really
Protection shadow.
did he?
Well, they show the trains though. I don't hear
Okay, there's that. If you want to run a train set, you got you covered. Proxmox is another one in the previous like little VSI roadshow that one of our coworkers attended. That's all they talked about was Proxmox. Didn't hear it mentioned once this week, so I don't know. But it's a good utility, gets you out of VMware, it's free. Support for it, obviously. But emulator host supported, depends on the vendor. Anything pretty much that works with Linux will work. And then there's this whole business of the serial port that we kind of talked about. That's why it's saying not supported. And that's the one they, yeah. But this is this name pipe thing. And if you haven't used that, it's a crazy ass thing of creating a VM simply for the ability for that VM to talk to this other VM so that you can connect to it through name pipes and you can get to the console. 923, this all goes away because 923 and above has a guest console built in. Super limited, can't scroll back, can't do a lot of things, but it'll get you there without all these passes. Is that a duplicate slide? Maybe no. More direct path stuff. Started a little late, so I'm running a little late, but all the previous options, hosting, NetApp. So that's a big thing. And once you're on a virtualized environment, anything that virtual environment supports and talks to for storage. But we've got customers on NetApp, not x86, but other emulations. Works just fine. So anything that it can see for storage, now you can use, which is great. That makes the data center managers and the other people very happy. Business continuity considerations, Keith could do, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours on this without thinking about it. But in deference to him, I certainly did mention that the best way to do this active clustering and connections to storage remotely is using an appliance that does the compression optimization of all that traffic, fiber channel over IP, Cisco device, what have you. All the storage arrays that I've talked about, except for the MSA, support some kind of replication. And I can't think of any ones that I talked about that I haven't seen in use. So people use them. Obviously, you should have 2 pathways for the replication. This is on other slides, but as you or other presentations, initially we're only going to support a 923 this 16 gig, not the 32 gig. So all that stuff is in the future. iSCSI was an interesting one that should get us around the problem of the creating a cluster of x86s. I can share the storage. This is post 923. Yeah, I think July 26th. I don't know what they mentioned next year. Yeah, maybe mid 25 they'll have a field test kit, but it's good they're looking at it because it does give them a way to provide shared storage without having provide all the support. Again, you saw this from Camille. Pass through, key logic, they'll support. They'll support is on the list. They're taking some time. Also, we can do it. So they're looking at some bare metal, Proliance, and Dell. And it's a good thing they're not married to HP, right? They can use other products because they're not in the HP's pocket. This is just a shot of some replication. 171 megabytes per second. But this is asynchronous. Every 5 minutes, it takes a snapshot, takes the differences, pushes it over, marries it back together on the other side. Our tool, CI tools, monitors all of that. And if they become out of sync for some reason, we end up getting alerted. Probably don't have time for this, but if anybody has any questions about Samba or any of that stuff, the new TCP/IP, better NFS. If you're having NFS problems, consider at least looking at 6.0. If you're not having NFS problems, that means you're not using it. And Samba, latest is 16D, the world's up to 22. One of the things I think I'm going to get from them is SMB mounts, which will let you make a static mount to an SMB, a Windows shared or a Linux shared file store. So you can actually create a VMS drive out of it. Right now it's ephemeral. You can connect to it, do your transfers, and then bail, and then it goes away. From the client perspective, obviously the whole idea of Samba is to be able to share stuff out, and it works and will continue to. You need, on this version, you need SSL3 and LDAP because they're assuming, as part of being maybe a member server, an Active Directory, you need the authentication to work. Windows XP and 7 clients are not supported, absolutely can work. There's a little hackery in the registry, but any fixes, and that's it. So this is an IBM hard drive. How big?
3380.
How much?
I've seen that pic before, but I can't remember what it is. 2 megs.
5 meg drive.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
So we're past due because my previous player was a little past due. If there's any quick questions, I know I ran through that quick, but we're going to have this as a publishable item. Probably want to hear it.
On the slides, did it say that the if you have 5 channel, you can have this V motion.
If you have a direct connect,
Yes, it's direct connect.
Correct.
Yeah.
yeah, but if you're presenting the volumes as VMware volumes, for example, or KVM or whatever, then you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
You ever get it with Nimble?
Hesitating because yes, that is 6, but
Itanium.
no, because Nimble didn't have the ability to set a UDID.
That's it.
Yeah,
Wait, say what?
does not have the ability, I don't think, to set a UDID on a Nimble volume.
I think I remember reading.
That's right.
Yeah, so you're kind of screwed there, but again, do a lot of emulators like carrying and stuff, so that's why I hesitate. You can play games with that, because carrying doesn't carry.
Emulator, got past a lot of this stuff, but
It did, but that's just for alpha, so the raw Itaniums, no.
can't ever.
Yeah, a big cabinet, 5 big drive. Yeah, exactly.